Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay and see our panelists clearly. So today our discussion for today is how to avoid profit erosion with improved design collaboration. So our panelists will run through some questions and get a nice discussion going. And and then at the end we would invite some questions. If you could put it into the chat box, and we can then field those questions towards the end of the session. So to start with, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves. So if we could start with Nick, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Yep, so Nick Wolf, Director of Virtual Design and Construction here at Microdesk. 15 years in the general, I'd say, AECO business. Starting as a fire protection engineer, working through some coordination and prefabrication with an HVAC subcontractor, and then eventually working as a BIM manager and MEP specialist for an E&R top 500 construction company here in the Northeast. So a little bit of everything, and now managing the VDC group here at Microdesk. Thank you, Craig.
Great. Yeah, Adam, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, Adam Davis, Virtual Design and Construction Manager at Lighthouse Electric, working on lots of design build contracts of various natures throughout the last 5 years or so, and then general contracting experience before that.
Awesome. Meghna.
Hi, my name is Meghna, and I'm an architect and urban designer. I have about over 15 years of experience on large-scale architecture and infrastructure projects. And I have worked on all stages from planning to construction. And just recently I've started my own studio, and part-time I am a senior consultant for a small practice that does more delivery based projects. And I'm also a panel review manager, quality design review panel manager that deals with more of the planning concept stages. So I'm trying to keep my foot in both the concept and the delivery stages as I go forward.
Great, thanks. And then Derek.
Hi, I'm Derek Mason. I'm the founding director of a structural engineering consultancy based in Southwest London called Superstructures Associates. I've got 35 years experience as a structural engineer, both in Africa and here in the UK. Work on projects from residential, commercial to sports and leisure. I'm also a published author with a book aptly titled Will It Stand Up?, which talks about the 7 essential principles of running a successful project, talking about the Olympic Stadium, which was one of the projects I worked on, the London 2012 Stadium. So lots of experience and hopefully a good contribution today.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I think this topic is a challenge that we've, is long there in history, and it would be great to, to get your insights on your experience and field some questions, and yeah, we go from there. So I think from here, what I'd like to do is basically go through what is your experience in profit erosion through design collaboration, and secondly, why is that important to you? We'll start with Nick.
Yeah, so it's interesting. As a past designer of, let's say, fire protection systems, for instance, and a fabricator of HVAC, everything's great when you're on the computer, right? You're in your environment, everything works, it's awesome. Then you go out and try to build it, right? You start to go through documents and other details and other pieces and come up with a whole bunch of questions, whether that be from a reviewer of fire protection systems and calculations, or even from the microcosm of a prefabricated piece, you get questions from the field, right? What were you looking at? What were you trying to come up with? It's near and dear to me because I think it's one of those things that is inherently part of the business. Yet, I think there's a few things that could happen before we even get the pen and paper that could help, right? So that's me. Both as a construction manager, MEP specialist, right, handling whole myriad of folks and a whole bunch of different trades, right? Managing RFIs and managing things that I would assume would be clear from the onset of the prints. day one, there's hundreds of questions, right? So I just, you know, I know there's a better way to do it. I just I think we're all here to maybe discuss what some of those methods are. Certainly don't have the answer, but interested to seek to find out.
Right. Yeah, Adam, that same question.
Yeah, so as a specialty subcontractor, similar to what Nick was discussing, it's been interesting to see how different contract structures are attempting to fix this issue that we're talking about. Yeah, design build is a word that we've been exposed to for a number of years, and there's just not a clear definition. When you say design build, it could be construed many different ways, and it leads to some disorganization, and it's very difficult to try to figure out what portion are we design building, what aren't we. So scope delineation and shared risk environments are attempting to help it. You know, we've been involved in a number of IPD contracts. Now we have an integrated form of agreement contract. So contracts are trying to be more flexible to include more collaborative environments between contractors and specialty subcontractors and design and engineering. But it's not an easy problem, and it's not going to be an easy fix. We've seen various stages of success, and we've seen some epic failures in our ability to be involved in them from time to time.
Great, thank you.
If I could really quick, Adam, do you think the contract methodology is a step ahead, or does it just serve to, you know, make a complex situation more complex?
So I think contract language is behind what we're seeing the built environment becoming, between the manufacturers getting more involved in modularization, distributors trying to get involved in how they can support fabrication and modularization. So I think the contracts are lagging behind the actual built environment, which I think we can expect to a point, but I think we need to close the gap.
I see. Meghna, yeah, the same question. What's your experience in this, and why is this important?
Well, I think it's really important from the onset to have a vision of delivering high quality design. And of course, everyone wants to make profit, but I think as long as like the design team has a certain set of values they want to bring forward, you can develop the right contract methodology, bring in cost consultants early on, and I think that collaboration and that communication needs to be known from the offset. What is the vision of the design? What's possible, and what clarity is required to make it procurable? And I think that's how I see it. And I think in the last few projects I've worked on, I mentioned before, contracts are now, like for large scale buildings, the architects sometimes novated once the contractor is given the job, which means the architects no longer is hired by the contract, no longer hired by the client. And that kind of streamlines that whole process in which there's a continuation to meet that quality standard.
Is that something is that becoming more popular, or is that just been a long-standing, maybe you get it, maybe you don't?
I think it's something that's evolving. I think as people realize how to make things at larger scale, I think it's a new thing, but it's, I think, proven to be very successful for large scale projects.
Yeah, Derek, the same question to you, please.
Yeah, I think one way to avoid the profit erosion is to actually find ways of not redoing things, to stop changing things, you know, getting clarity in the beginning on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, having good communication with all parties up front, you know, establish the principles, the various goals alongside the program, and that so that you can do it, because the cheapest way to get something done and built most economically is to do it once. And if one can avoid a lots of mistakes and lots of redoing of things, rehashing, then I think that's one way to move things forward in the right direction. It's not an easy science, otherwise we would have been doing it years ago. But I think it's just something we can start looking at, is better communication and, try and get it right first time. Obviously using technology, using practical experience and collaboration amongst all parties. I think that's the way forward.
Right, I'd like to say something. A lot of times architects do solve things in an iterative way, because you do have to kind of work through a problem. It's not like you do an engineer solution and it's just done. I think that's where usually there's like that issue, I think, of that iterative design process that happens. And so sometimes you wonder, like, when is the right time to bring in the other parts?
Yeah, I think you can do that. Yes, I understand the iterative process, but if you bring the structural engineer in early enough, he can help guide the architect in certain ways to stop mistakes being happened, or you designing this wonderful structure, but it can't actually physically stand up. Well, then you're hiding to nothing. So, it's a part about the collaboration is you'll have some ideas, we could have a look at it, give you some pointers, you go away, you carry on with the next phase, and that way you hone it down to the final solution.
It's a perfectly simple way of starting that process, right? One of the things you often look at when you get into a coordination situation in a building, right? Structure is not going to go anywhere, right? The building is predicated on the structure itself. So I think Derek's point's fantastic. If you at least take a look with your mechanical systems, maybe some of your larger stuff, right off the bat with structure, and try to clear that out, I think it's a great excuse me, it's a great place to start. It's the very beginning, and it's the one piece that really won't be moving much. But typically, Derek, when in a traditional construction methodology, when is it that you normally get to start to have these conversations and collaboration? Is it after the fact when all the questions come up, or?
I mean, often we'll only get involved once the whole structure has been designed by the architect, it's gone to planning, they've got planning, then often we only get involved. And sometimes we then look at it and say, well, yeah, that looks great, but it won't work because of X and Y. And sometimes they then have to go back to planning to change a few things. So ideally, before they go to planning would be a good time, but they need to go to a certain stage so we know what they're trying to achieve.
Right. Back to that iterative process Magna just mentioned.
Yeah, which is very annoying to engineers.
Right.
Something that's required at the beginning of stages.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing a lot of is, you mentioning contracts, you mentioning having to make changes later on, and basically, a lot of it comes down to these things is liability. And so the question would be, is liability a key driver for efficiency in this area? And if yes or no, if it's a no, what do you think is the key driver? But basically, is liability one of the major drivers in bringing profit erosion and bringing that efficiency down? Nick.
Yeah, pondering that. Liability, though, from a sense of building something, I'm not sure it's liability, honestly. At least from a perspective sense. With prefabrication, right? The idea is to have a group of folks follow what is on the paper, right? Just as an architect and an engineer set out design intent for us to follow in the field, it's the same thing. However, no matter what I think I want to do with that prefabrication effort, when I hand it to somebody else, they've got a grander idea. Right? There's just a million ways to solve a puzzle, and I don't know if it's really liability as much as it is seeing things differently, right? And that's what makes or breaks a project, I think, a few times over, right? Is that the subcontractors see it differently than the design professional, and vice versa. So I think until those two worlds are considered very early on in the conceptual stage, To Derek's point, bringing people on earlier, to Adam's point about, about contracting, and to Megna's point about that iterative process. It's not going to change. It's when in which we start to have that communication back and forth. I've been involved in a few different contracting scenarios, IPD, design build, name a few different delegated design assist. There's a million different names for them. But I think the one key part of that was when we were working with the engineering group, it was more like, okay, you need a certain size or a certain pressure to get to where you need to be. And as a builder, I need a certain volumetric area, right, in which I can assemble this thing, I can install it, and then after the fact, I can have somebody maintain it, right? So I think there's a few different pieces that we're trying to get to in design, which is an idea for people to build. And then when we go to build it, there's just a few extra steps and parts and pieces that we need to add into that conversation to make it actually happen. So, the liability, right? We're all liable, right? As builders, we're all responsible for code compliant, adherent systems that are complete in all nature, right? We're not going to get away from that. It's the conversation. So it's almost, I look at it like, chit-chatting behind the teacher's back, right? Is that what we're going to have to get to in this business? Are we going to have to say, okay, we've all been awarded this project, right? We need to go and have our own separate breakout conversations to nurture these ideas to get things done that we need to get done, or, because I think the contract methodology pushes the liability to say, okay, you're in a design build scenario, so you must get together. Do we need to have the principal telling us that we need to get together, or should we just do this because we know it's the right thing to do?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
I guess just to add a bit from myself is, a lot of what happens is that you would go in at a certain cost. You give a fee, and you say, okay, it's going to cost X, Y, Z, but you've cut those margins down to the bone, right? So you look for any excuse to extend it. So you go like, well, Nick didn't give me the information at the right time. Now I need a 2-week extension. Now give me more fee. Now suddenly I can start making profit. Nick's going, I better stop that from happening by giving the most robust, low-level information that is rock solid. And so we start building these inefficiencies where maybe you stop giving me information in case I can use that against you. So that at least for me would be maybe that goes back to Adam's point of contracts. Maybe their contract isn't designed in a way to help facilitate that. Adam, what would be your insight into it?
Liability is tricky. Professional liability insurance in a contracting space exists for a reason. But I think Nick hit it on the head with where eventually those who are focused solely on liability and protection will kind of weed themselves out, and those relationships that get built with client owners, general contractors, build partners, the folks that are focused on the value and the client and the end product of the building, they will essentially come to the forefront, right? They will prove themselves as a value partner, where liability is a concern, but it isn't a barrier to getting things done and putting the right decision forward in a project. So liability is tricky, and we have to consider it. Whether it's contractually obligated by party is one way, but those folks who are making good decisions for the project as an end result, I think liability can be part of that discussion, but it's not going to be the primary focus. And that's what I've seen even in very loose contractual environments, is that usually folks will be more collaborative when they know that you have the best interest in the project at heart. So it is a concern, it is out there, but as far as contractors that have true value, that are looking for those client-focused results, I don't think it's a barrier.
Yeah, Magna, I'd have the same question for you about liability, how that sits.
I think I agree with Adam. It's more of a value. A liability, all of us, based on our profession, whether structural engineer, contractor, we all have we're liable for different aspects of delivering. But at the end of the day, it all has to come together. And I don't think it's about, not giving information, not doing that, because it's just hurting the project as a whole. It's not doing any good. So it is understanding that everyone's liable for their own parts, but the only way it's going to work is if we will all work together. That's about it.
Yeah. Great. Derek.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to be saying much of what the others have said. I mean, some people, they're scared of liability and they concentrate on covering themselves. And unfortunately, what that does is that stops them collaborating with the other team members as well as they could. But, as it's been, I think as Adam said earlier, that, eventually those people all sort of deselect themselves because, people buy from people and people like working with people that help them achieve their goals, and the principle I talk about in my book is, one of them is, have a common goal. The project should have a common goal, to obviously achieve the project, to achieve all the objectives as cost effectively and economically as possible. And, everyone has a part to play in that. And I think if everyone keeps that front of mind, working together, helping each other to collaborate and to make things easier for each other, then that way, the project will be successful. And then liability will, while it's always in the back of your mind, that's where it should stay, at the back of your mind. It shouldn't be your main focus, because otherwise you should go and be a solicitor. You shouldn't be in the construction field. And that's what the approach that we take. A lot of architects and clients who work with us is because we make their life easier. We foresee problems. I've got enough experience that I can look at something and say, well, yeah, we're doing with this now, but don't forget about X and Y, because that's going to happen if we don't do this. And it's just by, forewarning people. We've got a simple rule. The only silly question is one you don't ask, because that way, it's open and clear communication. People should be able to question things in a good way, not try and make people look small or stupid, but question things, have we thought of this? Have we considered that? Because mistakes are far easier and less, more cost efficient to solve on paper than they are out on site. And by doing that up front, I think liability does become less of an issue, because everyone's collaborating and working together. You should cover all the issues, so therefore there should be less problem, which means there's less liability issues.
Yeah. I guess what's coming out of that is that communication side, right? Getting in that communication, well, allowing whatever system you use for I guess everybody to receive it, or have an environment where you don't need to maybe ask a specific person, but maybe you can put that information out there. But you mentioned before, Derek, about bringing engineers, contractors, maybe facilities management earlier on in the design phase. Where do you think? Well, firstly, if you could just expand on the pros to that, but also when do you think that would be appropriate, and maybe also some of the downsides to it?
Well, again, I think it would depend on the size of the project. If you take, for example, London 2012 Olympic Stadium, that was a massive project that cost billions. And what they did is they brought the design and build contractor, the architect, the engineer, the mechanical engineer, structural engineers, everyone together right at the beginning. They had worked on a previous stadium project before, so they knew each other, which helped. But they brought them all together in one location, which they could physically do. In this case, and in a lot of cases, it's not possible. But then that just helped the bonding and everything, and everyone worked together. Communication was not a problem because everyone was in the same building. So that was an ideal situation, which unfortunately, one can't always replicate on all projects. But it's about bringing everyone together, if not physically, at least, together from a goal point of view, the clarity on what you're trying to achieve, what responsibilities everyone has, what the intended program is. So it's all about clarity, communication, understanding each other, and working together. That's where I see the the best solution is.
And any cons?
The cons is cost certainty. See, because you bring people on, and yes, you can give a ballpark fee, the contractor can give a ballpark cost, but what is everyone judging that on? You need something to base it on. So cost uncertainty is one of the big drawbacks, and that's obviously one of the biggest risks, because if you don't know exactly what you're building, I mean, like in the Olympics, they knew it had to be an 80,000 seat stadium, so they had some idea of what it was, but the form and the form of construction, the cost, all that work was worked out as things developed. But in a normal project, very few clients will decide to go ahead on a project not knowing what the final build's going to be. The risk is too high. So it's somewhere you got to have almost a middle ground, almost have a basic scheme design. That's what everyone quotes on. But then that scheme design is then developed by the team to the end product.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, I think I could ask the same question to Adam. What are the pros and cons to bringing on all parties essentially much earlier on in the design phase?
Well, as a subcontractor who typically is a late engager on a lot of projects, earlier better, right? Earlier the better. But it's well said about there has to be a cost benefit, right? So at what point are you adding value? Is it a tiered approach with team members where you're starting small and then gradually adding during the design development, so you get the input but not the cost at first? And again, the target of what you're trying to do is probably going to dictate what involvement you need. And there is a balance between the efficiency to build the building and the efficiency to actually run the building. So, balancing the client's needs in that collaborative environment of, hey, we want to have a process inside of our building that operates X, and balancing that with the constructor's need to having it built a certain way because that's more efficient. So having an electrical contractor, especially involved early, helps with space planning because of the schematic nature of an electrical design. So electrically, I think when you bring a contractor in, they're starting to volumize all of the feeders and all of the cable trays, all of the electrical systems in a building that typically are developed very schematically initially. So that it helps with space planning from an electrical point of view. And the con is the cost, right? But again, it's cheaper to spend the $100,000 you may spend upfront on a project. We hope solves the $10,000 or $100,000 you might spend downstream in the project. So you're saving the cost upfront, ideally. But yeah, in a nutshell, electrically especially, we like to be involved as early as possible to help make those constructability decisions.
Meghna, you probably get involved the earliest in design out of everyone here. Let's say that what would you like to see happen? Like, how early on would you like to get the structural, the structures involved, MEP, facility?
I think it depends on the building typology. I mean, if it is always stadiums or airports, then you kind of know, you have an idea of what the functions are, and you can get all of them involved from the beginning. But it's funny, I'm working on a very unique project right now as a consultant and at a more delivery stage. And we've inherited these very beautifully geometric banana-shaped kiosks that hold heavy electrical equipment, but they're part of this landscape. And the whole design is it's visionary, it's beautiful. But we've inherited these drawings and we don't know how it's going to be built. Glazed brick, bronze roof, double doors. We don't know if you can meet the performance requirements. And there's been a lot of complaint, like, how did these get through to this level? And And there's this part of me is like thinking, yeah, it's very annoying, you know, this doesn't work at all. But there's this other part of me that's saying like, you know, the person who designed this, like we needed that vision to help deliver this. And it was kind of nice that there was that room to allow that to happen. Because that's when you get like beautiful buildings and new things happen, is when you can be inspired to do that. You don't want to be like, okay, that costs too much. Okay, that's just not possible. How are you going to get curved bricks? And how do you get a curved door and all that? It's hard, but like I think having that space to have that vision is important also. So you gotta gauge the project and what it is, and bring in the consultants at the appropriate time. Maybe a little earlier on this one, now that I see it's like stage 5, and I'm like,
yeah,
but I can see why it's gone this far.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that in terms of you know, I do some work with a university, interior design university, and part of their the creativity side is giving them that freedom. So I help them on certain aspects, but it's like, you know, it's to help using Revit and certain tools. So then when they come to me with these designs, and I'm like, oh, how do you expect to build this? It's you know, just give me some sense of how it's supposed to be built. But then as they start to do that, it's like, okay, we can start coming up with solutions at the time. Like for instance, they'd have a spline that is, and you can't measure it. There's no way to physically measure this thing. You're going to have infinite amount of radius points, right? So it's like, let's just simplify it slightly. But bringing that sort of let's say consultation early in the design, at least in my experience, would help. Hopefully not squash creativity, but at least give that little bit of momentum in the right direction to get it buildable. I guess on your side, Nick, you again sitting on the other side of the design process, how early would you like to get on board, and what do you see the benefits and cons, I guess?
Yeah, speaking from like a subcontract or contractor standpoint, literally early as possible for everybody. Builders, all contractors, design folks, everybody in the same room, co-locate, you're right there, hammer through it. The reason being is because I don't think I'm from a contracting standpoint, not trying to stifle design. I think design is beautiful. The funkier, the better for me, frankly. But it's when you go to try to cram all the stuff in, right? So my only interest in that early meeting of these key folks is the fabrication level of detail. You know, we can draw straight pipes down a hallway all day long. We could put the duct here, the pipe here, the electrical here, the lights underneath, and the sprinkler underneath that, right? That's all cool. But when we start to have the nuances of what it actually takes to put those things in the hallway is where we run into issues. So my involvement with subcontractors early on is not to push back on design parameters or to minimize, you know, what we're capable of doing via, you know, the design that we're presented with, but more of let's flush out all the details, all the little gotchas that end up, you know, coming at you when you're in the field trying to do something, right? So I think early engagement speaks to not only the ability to get the project done cleaner, but it presents itself with the opportunity to look ahead after we're done, and that's for the owner's sake, right? So a lot of things that we do in a building design, we're you know, especially we've all been there with deadlines, and we need to hurry and get out a set of drawings, and you know it's critical. And then we park the air handler right next to the wall, right? And then we have no means of cleaning or retrofitting coils, right? These silly things that in retrospect are like, oh man, you know, we totally could have gotten this. So that's my interest in it. And I'm gonna be stuck in the mud and say there's no cons. The earlier you can get those people talking, there's nothing bad that's gonna come out of it. And to Adam's point perfectly, we have to spend $1 million in pre-con. I guarantee you the $1 million spent in pre-construction and figuring those things out would save you $1 million, if not more, in RFIs and SKs later. The whole point of this discussion is to figure out how do we save the design folks from having to redraw the things that they carefully thought of very early on in the beginning? They're only tasked with doing that and answering silly questions, quote unquote, because we all weren't in the same room together at the onset of this. So that's why it's almost to my, I don't know, my kidding side of the whole thing is like, do we really have to have a clandestine meeting where we're all just focused on the end result and we have to, we're all in the same job and we're subcontractors and general contractors and designers. We need to just peel away for a week or two and figure it out on our own, in the absence of being presented with a contract method that supports that sort of activity, right? So all pros to meeting earlier, the better, and literally no cons. So, my perspective.
Derek, I guess, you know, bring the point of Nick in terms of having his pipe layouts and units. For you, I mean, you can probably have a good guess yourself in terms of what's going to be there, but oftentimes you probably get in earlier than when the MEP engineer might come in. So what are the sort of things that you would help if you were in communication at the same time?
Well, I think it's, you know, having sort of discussion with the architect as well as with the mechanical, electrical engineers in what zones does everyone need to get their bits in, really. You know, the architect, they want to know what the total void in that floor area is. We need to know what void do the M&E guys need for all their pipes and ducting and electrical trays and things, because, you know, we can either put holes through beams or we can reduce the depth of the beam and leave a clear void below for the cable trays and the ducts and things, and that's often a more economical way of doing it. But then by reducing the depth of the beams, you're increasing the weight of the steelwork. So there's, you know, pluses and minuses, but if it makes the insulation and the future maintenance of the electrical and mechanical stuff better, it's an investment worth doing. You know, we wouldn't want to stifle the design and the creativity. You know, if engineers were left to design buildings, they'd all be square because that's the most efficient shape. Whereas, you know, we need architects and other professionals to make the buildings look different and beautiful, and that because that's what gives them their character. You know, and we all want to be working on things that we are proud of, you know, and that's where the architects and other designers have a big part to play. At the end of the day, it's got to stand up, which the structural engineer does, and it's got to work with the mechanical and electrical guys come in, because without your ventilation and your heating and all your services, the building can't function. So that's why we're so integral. We have to work together.
I guess, you know, just listening to this, we've spoken a lot about the design, I guess, side, which is what the part of the topic is. But when we go through to the buildings built, there's facilities management now that's got to take this. I guess maybe this could be a question to Adam. How would contracts change to help that the lifetime of the building be taken into account? Because most of this is just design. So what could we do to incorporate the rest? And then as that early stage concept, you're now thinking about facilities and how to manage it.
Yeah, good. That's a tough one. But I think the coordination process is helping that, right? So now that we're you know, fully, you know, our level of detail is going up through the roof and all these models and how we're modeling things and what's being asked to be put in the model, we're seeing some of those issues that are life cycle based issues get solved, or at least get stymied by coordination, right? So a VAV access box, or how can I get inside of a light fixture to replace a ballast, or how close can this be to a doorway, and even architectural elements are using clearances to start, you know, double checking door swings against all of our code clearances. So I think the advent of higher level detailed models is helping to solve that. The best results I've ever had is bringing during the design and coordination process, having somebody from facilities being involved in those meetings so they can give their feedback on how they do their job, right? I may be an electrical contractor and I think I know how someone likes to access a light, but having the person who does it for a living right next to me while I'm going through the model tells me better than I think I know myself. So having the facilities team involved was the best use of that I've seen. As far as life cycle for the building, separate from coordinating and access, that has to be a target, right? So some facilities are targeted for 20 years, some facilities are targeted for 50 years. And I think the different targets that you have kind of, do we look at a first cost for install? Do we look at a life cycle for install? And when we're making even design decisions on equipment, and that's really where you're going to make those changes. So the target needs to be very clear as far as what the building life cycle is, so that you can make the design decisions that then will allow the facilities people to help make their life easier during the building and the construction of it.
Yeah, that's great. I think for Meghna, how often is early stage design taking into account the management of the building post contract? I think you have it in mind, but how seriously is it taken to the point? Like, do you ever start collaborating or consulting with facilities in early stages?
Facilities as in like cleaning and maintenance strategies, that sort of thing, or how?
Yeah, cleaning and maintenance would be the key one, and I guess asset management coming in a bit to that, but mostly cleaning and maintenance.
Well, all the big projects I've worked on, whether it's, and my role will be kind of very defined, whether it's like doing the facade design or doing the core design. We always had design team meetings where all consultants were present, and this is like around planning stage, planning and design development. And whenever we were designing anything, cleaning and maintenance, we had MEP engineers either that would have access and maintenance people within their company also be advising us as to how to design the facade, how to make sure BMUs can be parked, or what can be, how often, and all those like logistics. And that was at design development stage. It's quite like early on that we had to start considering that. And as the design went through the different stages, it became more and more fine-tuned. But I think it is very important to know all of those aspects of how it's going to be functioning.
Yeah.
I don't know if it should be done at concept stage, really.
No.
Just don't. Yeah. I just don't think, as amazing as engineers are, I just I'd like to think that we can design the concept, and then you guys can give us the input on on that.
Okay, so we've drawn the line in the sand there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I'm not going to do a squiggly line. Okay, how is that help?
Nick, I think a question to you would be, how can we use technology to help bring all these factors early on in the design? So we've got all these new tools, new things are coming out every year. What would you say is the vision for like giving people the right information earlier? What can we do?
Yeah, just as a BEP, or BIM execution plan, guides us on a particular project, right? How we're going to use BIM and technology. I think the same needs to go for the early stages, right? And not necessarily like we're going to use Revit, we're going to use, whatever, right? But I think speaking more towards, a higher level of detail at that time, or at least identifying, look, the amount of building that's been done, right? We have to be able to catalog some of those day one things that we know are going to happen. Gravity pipe versus a very large duct in the main corridor, right outside the telecom room, right? Or right outside the mechanic. These happen all day, every day around the world. So I would say an early list of parameters to at least flush out from a building perspective, in the design phase some early things that we could detect and take care of. And I think that goes towards specifying those objects or sets of systems, right, or areas within a building, pinch points, if you will, hot spots, whatever you want to call it. And then a level of detail that needs to go into that little box that we've identified that's always an issue, right? I think if we start there, it's a potential to save some of that downstream heartache, but at the same time, you get back to one of my earlier comments is that I say everybody's a Picasso, right? Everybody wants a whole bag of fittings and a whole bunch of pipe, and they'll just take care of it, right? Just go away and I'll figure it out. Well, that I think would go a long way into at least specifying a high level of clarity, those certain areas, to sort of eradicate that, you know, everybody's got an idea and it's all good, right? That's fantastic. That's what makes the world go round. However, I think prescriptive nature is the center of the A&E group. They need to prescribe what we're going to do downstream. If we just ratchet that prescription up a little bit in terms of level of detail and areas of focus, I think we might eradicate some of those downstream issues.
That sounds good.
Sounds great now, right, between the five of us, but
yeah, I guess part of what I was alluding to was things like you know, we're creating this digital twin, right, which is helping in so many areas with coordination. Like we're able to coordinate, you know, the way buildings are built far earlier than, well, we could before, right? Oftentimes the design's finished, now you figure it out. I guess it's a question to all of you, is how has the evolution of technology helped to solve this issue? Like, have you found, well, you know, going from the drawing board to AutoCAD to then going to the 3D environment, how's technology helped to bridge the gap to make a cleaner, less, let's say, less RFIs, you know, in that respect? So I guess this would start with Derek.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, I'm of the age where I did start on a drawing board, and then we went through the digital AutoCAD and Revit. I think it definitely helps those, particularly those that can't sort of automatically visualize from 2D to 3D. I'm lucky I can do that, whereas a lot of people can't do that. But I think having 3D now, particularly good with the M&E, you know, clash detection, things like that. And I'm talking only really on new builds. We found that the Revit doesn't really work on refurbishments in the sense where you're demolishing a lot of the building and adding bits on. That we found that doesn't work economically for us within our practice. But Revit for new builds does. And I think, you know, by doing that, you can help identify clash points and things like that, and work with M&E, particularly with their large ducts and that, and saying, well, you know, could we put it in this portion? Would that work for you? Could you go for a rectangular, a long, flat duct instead of a circular one? I appreciate your volume, your velocity's got to increase, but can you handle that? Because that would do X and Y, it would save, you know, on steel, on beams and things like that. So you can get that collaboration going early on because you've identified it, where in the days of the drawing board, it would be a line on a drawing, no levels, nothing, and you know, that gets sorted out on site. And that's when you start getting the RFIs, can we make a hole in this beam here or whatever? And that's when it starts getting expensive, because retrofitting things on site is expensive, and it also has quality issues as well. Whereas if it's sorted out up front, you know, it's manufactured in the steel workers factory, that's under very strict controls, etc., etc. So it's far easier and more economical to do. So, you know, I think 3D definitely has its advantages. The real issue comes is about, you know, who does the model, who controls it, who looks after it, and that's where our little liability thing slips in at the back door, because who's liable for that if, you know, someone else is working on the model and something gets deleted and no one is aware of it until later on? You know, I'm sure there's checks and balances that can be done. I don't know all the details on how these are always done necessarily, but you know, those are issues that need to be resolved and agreed up front. And as long as there's this collaboration and the will to do it, I think we can do it. But it just really needs that team spirit, the common goal, good communication, all those things we've talked about already.
Right. Adam, I think the same question for you would be, how has technology helped you? And is there a trend that's going in the right direction to make this even better?
Yeah, so I'll beat it with a stick is the schematic nature of electrical design, right? That's something we live on the back end as a contractor in saying we have this defined space, but we don't have 48 branch 3/4 inch pipes accounted for, of course. So we're getting to be creative in figuring those things out, and we're getting better in making those design decisions upstream and leaving more space. But technology is going to help us make better cost modeling decisions, right? So if I change this to aluminum feeders, what does that do to my volume that I'm using inside of my corridor, right? What kind of changes is that going to make to me? And that's where technology is going to help us make good decisions in the coordination space that are also providing cost data back to our owners, right? So that's where I think we're going to start getting to is being able to make very good coordination and modeling style decisions based on cost, and then have that kind of be iterative, right? So it's not that we have to create parallel models, it's that we can quickly go between design options or design decisions that we want to make and understand what the effect will be, right? If I do increase the velocities, what does that do to me? And if I do increase X, Y, and Z, and as far as an MEP space, what is my anticipated structural effect to that change? And those things are going to happen more quickly and allow us to make better decisions, not just for how the building gets built, but for the overall cost of the building. So I think that's kind of a direction that we'll see. The modeling is going to come along with it. The liability will catch up to it, right? But I think we're going to see technology have a bigger effect on our ability to make effective modeling decisions and effective design option decisions earlier in the process, just because we'll have better developed tools to do so.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I like that. I think to finish things off, I'm going to just pose a question to all of you. If you could have that magic wand that you could just change something, to make this process smoother, more profitable, and just improve design collaboration, what would you do? I'll start with Meghna.
Well, I'm gonna probably say something really aspirational. I think I'd like to know that everyone involved throughout the design process has maybe a similar vision in providing high quality design, and I think that at the end will produce a better project beyond the liability, the profit. I mean, of course, we all want to make money out of it, but at the end, we want to make a good building. So having that alignment of vision would be my magic wand.
I see. Let's go to Derek.
For me, I think the magic wand would be that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet, which is basically they have the common goal, that they plan everything properly. They have this proper open communication strategy that everyone bought into and works with. That there's good teamwork amongst everybody, because we should all be working together, not against each other. And as much as one likes to think everyone does on all projects, I think we've all had experiences where that doesn't happen. Look at creating this legacy, this vision that the client and the architect and everyone has had. Let's help create it, make it a practicality, but make sure that it can actually be built. Obviously make sure that from a structural point of view it can stand up, and from M&E and that it actually works as it should. That it's fit for purpose. That the building works as it's intended, you know, because at the end of the day, that's what the client's vision and dream was. He wanted to work like that, you know. And then, you know, hopefully you can find teams that work together well like this, and then you can start replicating them or using them on future projects because you've sort of been through that learning curve already, and then take that on board, you know, the lessons learned, and then use that on future projects, because hopefully we don't have to keep making the same mistakes.
Great, thank you. Nick.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of head shaking there with Derek. I completely agree with that. Building on past success, focusing on the goal, and honestly working together. It's the honesty in that I think we're going to struggle to get. But the reality is, I think focusing on relationships, focusing on you know, bringing everybody together, collaboration and relationships. If I could make a switch, it would be you know, an instantaneous switch to the whole way we do this is relationship driven. Trust each other, work together, right? Work towards a common goal. Don't try to, you know, put ductwork where I know Adam wants to be, or, you know, or vice versa, right? You know, it's there's a lot of that goes on. This comment is much larger than our little niche of the industry in the world. I mean, it goes into so many different things. And I think until we change that sort of thought with contracting, or even thought with bidding, right? You know, bidding and trying to trying to be a part of a project, right? Who knows what that strategy is going into it? Did I, you know, am I seeing things downstream that I'm going to withhold and mention later on in hopes that I could ratchet up my fee somehow to get back to normal, right? So we honestly put that aside in so many different parts of our lives and really focus on relationships and trust and team building. You know, we don't have to experience the same thing over and over again, to Derek's point. So if I could change anything quickly, it would be focusing on better relationships between everybody, trying to build a common goal, right?
Excellent, thank you. And last but not least, Adam, to finish us off.
Yeah, much has been said that I won't reiterate, but having a mission statement for the building seems to get people engaged in targeting that mission. And then, you know, simple things like having like we have a flow diagram for processes in a building, having a flow diagram for communication, right? So that way everyone does understand the routing of effective communication, right? So project teams of over 100 or 200 folks, it becomes convoluted. So just some of the basics are nice to have and to keep in mind. That way, when you do have a question about a process related system, you know directly where to route the question or how to route the question and who needs to be notified along the way.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that from all of you, Derek, Megna, Nick, Adam. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I appreciate your time. So yeah, thank you to everybody who was watching. I hope you found this informative. Send myself any questions via LinkedIn or via just this broadcast, and I can be in touch about anything and maybe forward them on to any of the panel members. But yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you. We'll stop there. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.